This is the download recap from Sounds Profitable, the most important news from this week and why it matters to people in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis. The download is brought to you by Podscribe, and you can find out more at podscribe.com. This week's top stories. I tell you everything that I found out about Advertising Week New York, the parasocial paradox, why AI podcast hosts might actually work, but not how you think, Spotify's ChatGPT integration, and a conversation with Acast CEO Greg Glenday. Let's get started. A lot happened in New York this week, so let's run down some highlights. Over 20,000 attendees descended on a small slice of Manhattan to discuss the future of podcast advertising. One running thread is that of generative AI and what it means for marketing, both for the mechanics of how advertisers build and publish ads and for the content world they're advertising in. With the launch of Meta's Vibes feed and OpenAI's Sora tool, social media feeds are now swamped with a new wave of feed-clogging content. The trick is, as is usually the case, this new tech exists before safeguards are built to keep it in check. Convincing Rick and Morty character animations and 3D Pokemon characters are out there promoting cryptocurrencies. Almost convincing videos of Mount Everest climbers jumping to their death are going viral. I've even gotten a Sora clip pretending to be footage of a community theater production of Sopranos the Musical from 2007. And now, the idea of Stephen Sondheim doing a Tony Soprano musical will forever be lodged in my brain as something we need, but cannot have. The role of the content creator has shifted in recent years at events like Advertising Week New York. This year's edition featured a live taping of Hot Ones, a $25,000 creator pitch contest sponsored by Adobe, and a session with Darman whipping up a campaign for Gap live on stage. Advertising Week Global President Ruth Mortimer told Digiday the event has done private events built around creators, but this year, things like the Meta-sponsored Creator Lounge are a new development. Traditionally, creators are the last to be brought into a campaign, chosen to fit an agreed-upon direction the brand decided on. Now, creators are making an effort to reverse that flow, hosting their own brand activations and positioning themselves as a vital part of the advertising industry. But one of the biggest, if not the biggest, thing to come out of advertising this week is the announcement that Microsoft's demand-side platform, Microsoft Invest, formerly known as AppNexus or Xandr DSP, is being absorbed into Amazon DSP. As of March 2026, Microsoft will retire their ad-selling division, and their advertisers will be migrated into Amazon's ecosystem. As Ronan Shields' reporting notes, it's not just a consolidation of clients, it's a consolidation of inventory control. Between this and deals made with huge streamers, it's feasible that an average Amazon DSP client could reach 80 million CTV households with just a mix of Amazon-owned inventory and a dash of Roku for spice. Recently, Tom Webster guest lectured for Steve Goldstein's Business of Podcasting class at NYU. One of the assignments Goldstein gave the class was to listen to an AI-generated podcast episode and give feedback, which sparked a question from Webster. Quote, "Given that so much of the trust we have in podcast hosts and the ads they read is based on parasocial relationships, can we have a parasocial relationship with an AI?" End quote. Luckily, there's relevant research papers based on the subject, such as in Computing and Human Behavior, a journal focused on the use of computers in the psychological perspective. There's a new paper called An Assistant or a Friend, the Role of Parasocial Relationship of Human-Computer Interaction. That's from the School of Economics and Management in Changsha University. It looks how humans build parasocial or one-sided relationships with automated tools. A key finding of that paper is that the people involved in the study formed two distinct relationships with AI characters: assistant relationships and friend relationships. AI characters that fall into the first group are seen more competent but less warm, while friend characters are seen as far more warm but also less trusted to be competent. As Webster says, consider the difference in reaction you'd have asking for a fact check from Siri versus asking your buddy Chad. If podcast hosts are going to use AI clones of their voices to enable host-read ads at scale, and they are already, A potential key to not aching out audiences might be understanding that difference and knowing how to tune the robot voice to be a friend or an assistant given the right context. For example, a true crime podcast would likely use a AI version of the host to lean more towards friend vibes, while a tech podcast might prefer a no-nonsense, competent assistant version of the host. Both take into account the time and place the AI host surrogate is being used in, and respects the specific brand of parasocial relationship the actual host is cultivated long enough to make the podcast itself monetizable at a scale that would need an AI-generated host-read ad. A new update to OpenAI's generative chat bot adds formal integrations with several apps. For example, once you set it up, users can ask the bot about real estate listings and be served official links from Zillow. Most notable among those integrations is podcasting's, as users can ask ChatGPT for music and podcast recommendations now, and something from Spotify will pop up in the feed that opens Spotify if you click on it. AI search optimization is in the air, as earlier this week I also covered a report looking at how major chatbots are almost exclusively looking at YouTube when they go trawling for video sources. If one wants their YouTube video to catch the eye of Gemini or ChatGPT, it's best to focus on tutorial content, how-to videos, and generally explanatory content that answers direct questions or focuses on specific details that would help someone asking a question about that topic. Similarly, Spotify podcasters now have AI optimization to consider. With the right keywords and presentation, a podcast will likely grab ChatGPT's attention when looking for a given topic over more generically presented shows, even if they talk about that specific topic even more so. I'm back at it with new videos, and I've got a doozy for you this week. Back on September 18th, Brian Barletta sat down with the newly instated Acast CEO Greg Glenday to have a chat, and I've got that all formally edited for you now. The conversation kicks off with Barletta asking what, as the new CEO, Glenday thinks Acast does. Video podcasting, while an important part of the industry, has gotten disproportionate share of conversation for what it is in the podcast ecosystem. In Glenday's eyes, including overlap where traditional video content gets labeled as podcast content. Here's a quote from Glenday, quote, "If you have a podcast that doesn't work unless someone is sitting there looking at it on a screen and they have to look at it the whole time, that might not be a podcast. You may have something else there." End quote. The lack of centralized algorithmic or platform control over podcasting remains its core strength. A direct relationship between content creators and their audiences that can't exist in television or social media platforms. As Glenday points out, there's a whole wide world of slang vocabulary constructed specifically because content creators on social platforms have figured out which words get them demonetized or devalued in the algorithm. And with content creators ultimately owning the distribution and content itself, podcasting operates virtually without borders. Glenday says he loves to see whenever a show from, say, the United Kingdom will crack the top 50 podcasts in the United States, because that's something that just can't happen in old school media. Here's a quote from Brian Barletta following that up. Quote, "How hard was it to watch Doctor Who in the United States for decades? It would have been top of the charts." End quote. Circling back to what Acast does in podcasting in general, Glenday describes podcasting at its core as three things: an audience, the shows they want to listen to, and the brands that want to work with the latter to get to the former. Quote, "Acast should be as invisible as possible behind the scenes connecting these three people. My job is really easy. We talk to the creators, we talk to the audiences, we talk to the brands. Whatever complaints they have about the industry becomes our to-do list. We use everything at our disposal. We have 100 product dev engineers working every day to remove friction." End quote. Finally, it's time for quick hits. These are articles I've covered throughout the week that didn't quite make the cut for top story today, but are still worth including in your weekend reading. First up, The Diary of a CEO creator Stephen Bartlett and former Mr. Beast engineer Roxcodes have teamed up to launch Flightcast, a platform that allows video podcasts to distribute across major platforms from inside one dashboard. For example, the Podcast Movement Archive YouTube channel was able to clone itself over to a video podcast feed on Spotify with a couple button presses. It was pretty cool, I'm not going to lie. As an SEC filing for Podcast One's preliminary record for Q2 fiscal 2026 shows, they have $14.5 million in revenue, a 19% increase year over year. Coleman Insights and Women in Media Network are launching a new report called the LGBTQ+ Podcast Consumer Study, a research initiative designed to provide insight into consumer habits, creator challenges, and industry opportunities in the queer podcast ecosystem. Sponsorship opportunities for the study are still available. The Wall Street Journal has covered Alex Cooper launching the Unwell Ad Agency, which made a splash by soft launching at Cannes Lion this year, and then formally launching with the announcement that their first client is Google. And finally, a new episode of Podcast Perspectives interviews Lex Friedman about the evolution of the podcast industry. That was the download brought to you by Sounds Profitable. I know I went through today's stories fast, but you can catch them with the link in the show notes that leads you to today's post on soundsprofitable.com with every link in it. You can also go there to find every issue of the download ever. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Our producers are myself, Brian Barletta, and Tom Webster. And as usual, special thanks to you for sticking with me as I brought you the top stories you might have missed from this past week. Robot.
Download complete.